which source you often use to get information: newspaper, radio, TV, and the survey shows 62% of the people chose internet. You might be thinking I am going to say how important the internet is, or how quickly it has changed the world for a few years. But what if I tell you this survey is conducted on the website globeandmail.com? Our answer will be different because the people who did this survey on a website must be frequent users of internet. This sample is a biased sample, so we have to pay attention to how a survey is conducted. Take the coffee industry. The figures are roughly these. Take the coffee industry. The figures are roughly these. The coffee market in the world is worth about $60 billion. The growers get $5.5 billion. 10 years ago, the market was about $30 billion and the growers got a third of that. What has happened? What has happened is that well-meaning people, Americans, Germans, Europeans, decided that they would help Vietnam. And so they created a coffee industry there, which is now the second biggest producer in the world. This has serious effects on other countries like Colombia that depend on coffee exports. I believe our borders should be open, but if that is not politically acceptable for now, Europe should at least open up a legal route for people from developing countries to come work here. Over time, hopefully, we can move to a position where borders are completely open. Persuading skeptics won't be easy. That's why I think the argument for free migration has to be made at several levels. A principled case, it increases freedom and reduces injustice. A humanitarian case, it helps people much poorer than ourselves. An economic case, it makes us richer. And a pragmatic case, it is inevitable. So it is in everyone's interest to make the best of it. Freedom of movement is not just a matter of human rights and international solidarity. It is in our self-interest. Opening our borders may seem unrealistic, but so too once did abolishing slavery or giving women the vote. Campaigning for people's rights to vote freely is a noble cause for our time. A mild form of hallucination is known as a disturbance and can occur in most of the senses above. These may be things like seeing movement in peripheral vision or hearing faint noises and/or voices. Auditory hallucinations are very common in schizophrenia. They may be benevolent, telling the subject good things about themselves, or malicious, cursing the subject, etc. Auditory hallucinations of the malicious type are frequently heard, for example, people talking about the subject behind his or her back. Like auditory hallucinations, the source of the visual counterpart can also be behind the subject's back. Their visual counterpart is the feeling of being looked or stared at, usually with malicious intent. Frequently, auditory hallucinations and their visual counterpart are experienced by the subject together.
The brain is basically built from the bottom up. First, the brain builds basic circuits that are responsible for basic skills, and then more complex circuits are built on top of those basic circuits as we develop more complex skills. Biologically, the brain is prepared to be shaped by experience. It's expecting the experiences that a young child has to literally influence the formation of its circuitry. It's built into our biology. The interaction between genetics and experience that shapes brain architecture is embedded in the reciprocal relationships that children have with adults in their lives. And by that we mean what we refer to as the serve and return nature of children's interaction with their adults. Development and the impact of experience on development is not a one-way street. It's a back and forth interaction. The brain is a highly integrated organ which has multiple sections that specialize in different kind of processes. So we have parts of the brain that are involved more in cognitive function and other parts that are involved in processing of emotion and parts involved in seeing and hearing. So if a child is emotionally kind of well put together and socially competent, that will affect more positive and productive learning. And if a child is preoccupied with fears or anxiety or is dealing with considerable stress, no matter how intellectually gifted that child might be, his or her learning is going to be impaired by that kind of emotional interference.
And this illustration often used is the one of the monkeys at the typewriter. Okay, so we have a monkey sitting on a typewriter, and the claim here is basically if you leave chance and time long enough, you will get life. Don't worry about it. Yes, it's strange. Yes, it's wonderful. But leave enough matter, 600 million years on Earth, and you will have life. So So the monkey's sitting at the typewriter, and the chances are eventually he produces the complete works of Shakespeare, so what's the problem? But he doesn't manage to do it in 600 million years. So what I decided to do to run the numbers is instead of saying type the complete works of Shakespeare, I just ran the numbers for how long would it take a monkey typing at one keystroke a second to type to be or not to be, that is the question. Right? On average, how long is it going to take my monkey friend at one keystroke a second? I don't know how long you think that would be. Maybe you can have a guess. Would it be less or more than 600 million years, which is the period life on Earth is supposed to have emerged within? And when I ran the numbers, to be or not to be, that is the question, takes 12.6 trillion years to type just that phrase. And a DNA string, that complexity emerged by chance, undirected, within 600 million years. Again, it's mathematically possible, but it's so incredibly unlikely that it would have, that it tilts me in favor of the Christian story in which God creating life is simply a question of saying, let there be, and there was.
Western countries' birth rate. The birth rates increased during 20th century, but it starts to decrease over these last 2 decades. In the year 2000, as an example, the birth rate remained at around 1.1% to 1.2%. Birth rates dropped to its lowest point that has never been seen in the society. There are even some negative birth rates in other countries. The reason is that the Western countries' women are becoming more and more reluctant to give birth to babies, especially those young women under 30 years old. However, the male status in society remains as strong as it ever has in recent years. It also has impacts on male in the society, especially young men, and it might have some connection with unemployment rates as well.
Let's take a look at this video of these little kids. They were offered the option of having 1 marshmallow immediately or 2 marshmallows 15 minutes later. And you've got some very cute videotape of this experiment, so let's take a look. Okay.
What we found is a very simple and direct way of measuring a competence that seems to make an important life difference.
A researcher tells these preschoolers that she's going to leave the room. If they wait for her to come back without eating the marshmallows, they'll get 2 marshmallows. Or they can ring the bell and she'll come back right away. But then they only get 1 marshmallow.
I won't ring the bell.
You won't ring the bell? Okay. Looking at children over time, Dr. Michelle has found that being able to wait longer at 4 has some pretty powerful implications.
And what are those powerful implications? Is that that later in life they're more disciplined and have more self-control? Is that pretty much it?
Well, they are more likely to achieve their life goals. They have better relationships. They did better on their SAT tests.
I know, that's crazy. All because they waited 15 minutes for two marshmallows?
I mean, I think it is crazy. I probably would have eaten all three, but
yeah, me too.
But actually, yes, the ability to be able to pursue your goals. In this case, it was to have two marshmallows versus one, and not go on automatic and just grab the marshmallow, is a very important skill. But I think a main point in Mind in the Making is that these skills can be taught if you're 14 or 40 or 4. It's not ever too late, and any child can learn them, any adult can teach them, and it's never too late.
A language dies when the last person who speaks it dies. But sometimes people say it dies when the second last person who speaks it dies, because then the last person has nobody to talk to. Well, of course, languages have come and gone throughout history as communities have come and gone. But what's happening now is something really quite extraordinary. Well, there are about 6,000 languages in the world at the moment, more or less. Nobody knows the exact number. And of these, people think that about half of them are so seriously endangered that they're likely to die out in the course of the present century. Now, the present century is 100 years. Half is 3,000 languages. So that means one language is dying out somewhere in the world, on average, every 2 weeks. There are all kinds of reasons why languages die. One is the physical reasons, when people are affected by famine and disease and earthquake. Another is genocide, when some countries deliberately try and stamp out a small language. But the main reason is globalization. That is, there are some huge languages in the world like English and Arabic and Spanish and French, and these are like steamrollers, crushing the smaller languages that they find in their path. A great deal can be done to preserve an endangered language. The first thing is that the people themselves must want the language to be preserved. That's very important. The second thing is that the powers that be must want the language to be preserved. They must have a respect for the minority languages that are in their care. And the third thing that has to be there, of course, is cash. It costs quite a lot of money to preserve an endangered language. Think about it. You have to train the teachers, you have to write books for the children, and all that sort of thing. It doesn't cost an extraordinary amount of money, but it does cost a bit. So without money, endangered languages don't have a positive future.
Cities are interesting places. Some cities are carefully planned, built for a reason, and reflect the needs of the people as it grows. Others are less conscientiously designed. Paris, for example, was originally founded in the 3rd century as a small village, and with every passing generation it grew in size and importance. It grew from a medieval city to a modern city, but the transition was not always smooth. Emperor Napoleon III had to hire someone to oversee the rebuilding of Paris. The man he chose was Georges Eugène Haussmann. In 1853, Haussmann began the process of renovating France's capital city. His basic instructions were to bring light and air into the central districts, improve the sanitation and living areas, and make Paris a more modern, beautiful city. Not your average weekend renovation. Haussmann's projects included the destruction of the old medieval neighborhoods, widening of streets, building large parks and public squares, and addition of fountains and sewer lines. To add to all of this, the size of Paris had to be increased, doubled actually, and Napoleon III issued official decrees annexing nearby suburbs to make them part of the city. One of the main priorities of this massive renovation was to connect all of the districts together. If we think of Paris like a house, each district was its own room, existing essentially independently of the other districts. Napoleon III wanted it to be easier to travel between the most important districts and to create a sense of this being one unified city, not a series of independent neighborhoods. So Haussmann created large avenues that connected the districts. More than that, he made all of the avenues look roughly the same. Buildings on a major avenue were required to be roughly the same height and style, and even had to use the same cream-colored stone for the facade. The result was to remove any local characteristics and create a uniform Paris. For the first time, the city had a specific look, a style that people began to associate not with a district, but with Paris itself.